Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy and specifically to talk about cucumbers. Now, this isn't a topic that I've covered before and it does sound ludicrous, but cucumbers are actually a really big issue in Russia at the moment because the price has taken off and cucumbers are a really important part of the Russian diet. Now, the reason why cucumbers have become international news is because of this politician, Sergei Mironov. In recent discussions, he said this winter a new delicacy has appeared in our shops cucumbers. They used the same explanation for last year's golden potatoes, and now it's gilded cucumbers. What are people supposed to do? Just accept that they can't afford the most basic foods. Now, the reason why he's talking about cucumbers is that it's been reported that they've increased in price by 100% since December. So, in a 2 month period, or less than a 2 month period, the price has doubled. Now, you might be wondering, why has that happened? Well, Russia grows its own cucumbers and they're grown in greenhouses. So, they're under basically heat lamps, and the price of electricity has spiked in Russia. And the price of electricity feeds straight through to the price of cucumbers because that's the main form of cost that goes into pricing cucumbers. So that's basically why cucumbers have increased in price so much. And the reason why I wanted to talk about it in today's video is that this is basically a reflection of what's happening to food prices and general prices on the streets in Russia. I touched on this in a recent video that the official inflation data isn't really reflecting what's happening to real prices. So I don't think we're seeing the real deal in the official numbers. Now, just before we go on to have a look at that, I thought it was worth touching on how important cucumbers are to people's diet. Do you eat a lot of cucumbers? It's not something that I eat much of. I've been to a few afternoon teas recently where they do a really nice cucumber sandwich. I'm partial to a good cucumber sandwich, and I have them occasionally in salads. I've seen things on TikTok where they've gone viral, where people are spiralizing cucumbers and then putting soy sauce and loads of other things on there, but it's not something that I eat a huge amount of. And I thought it was worth having a look at which countries are the biggest consumers of cucumbers. And right at the top of this list is China. They eat on average 55 kilograms of cucumber per year. That is a lot of cucumbers. Second on the list is Turkey, coming in with only 21 kilos. That's still quite a lot in my book. And Russia eats on average around 12 kilos of cucumber per person per year. And I thought it was worth comparing that to the USA, where it's 5 kilos, the UK 4 kilos, same as Australia, and Canada is coming in very meager 3 kilos. So come on, Canadians, get your act into gear, start eating more cucumbers. Now, in order to put the increase in cucumbers into perspective, I thought it was worth looking at what's been going on with the price of other basic food items in Russia. The majority of these figures are not official figures. They've actually been reported through various media that are coming out of Russia, people who are actually following the price of things on the shelves rather than the official data. But if we just run through this, cucumbers, as I've just mentioned, up 100% in the last couple of months. The official data for cucumbers shows that they're up by only 34%. So quite a big divergence from what we're hearing and what the official figures are stating. Lemons are apparently up by almost 32%. Coffee, almost 26%. Tomatoes, 19%. Potatoes, which are very important to the Russian diet, more than 10%. Carrots, 8%. And cabbage, 7.6%. So you could probably make quite a good meal if you combined all of those different items. Not sure what it would taste like. There's no real protein in there. But anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about those figures is because of what's going on with the official data coming out of Russia. So if you've been following the channel, you'll know that the January inflation data has been published and it's showing an increase year on year of 6%. And the reason why that's important is because inflation is now rising again. It was down at 5.6% in December. And that's critical because of interest rates. Obviously, the Bank of Russia is trying to manage inflation to be at the target level of 4%. It's not going to do that in 2026. It's already acknowledged that the best option might be 4.5% to 5%, but realistically, I don't think it'll get to that level. But the reason why the increase in inflation is key is because it will put pressure on the Bank of Russia to actually increase interest rates from where they are at the moment. And they're currently sitting at 15.5%. And that is actually hurting a lot of Russian businesses that need to borrow more money to expand, or they're having to take on debt to fund their losses. And that debt is now prohibitively expensive. So a lot of businesses in Russia are actually paying a lot of their revenue to interest costs. That means that they're not able to expand, and also a lot of businesses are now making losses. So what's going on with inflation is really quite critical. And this chart shows what's been going on with food inflation over the past 5 years. Now, interestingly, the official data for January shows that food inflation was at 5.88%, which is less than the general inflation of 6%. But what we've seen from the data and what we're hearing about cucumbers and other anecdotal stories is that food prices are increasing significantly more than 5.88%. And the problem that that's causing on the streets of Russia is that it's making food less affordable for people, and a lot of people are struggling in Russia at the moment. And I thought it was worth having a look at inflation expectations. This is a survey that's taken amongst Russian households, so the people on the streets of Russia, what they believe is happening with inflation. And I've put this chart back 5 years just to show the expectations since the war in Ukraine started. So you can see that immediately following the war, there was a spike in inflation expectations up above 18%. And actually, that was probably realistic because real inflation rose above to around those levels at that time. And what we can see over the past 4 years since the war started is that expectations have been very high. And if we look at what's happened since 2025, we have got expectations for inflation of somewhere between 12 and 14%. Now, that compares to the official data, which says that inflation has come down from 10% to 6%. So, what we're seeing here is that the people in Russia do not believe what the official inflation data is saying. They believe that prices are rising by double-digit increases every single year. However, the official data isn't showing that. So somebody is wrong here. Either this chart is incorrect or the official inflation data and the official food inflation data is wrong. Now, leave you to make your own decision. But what we're hearing from a Russian minister is that he's saying that cucumber prices have doubled and that they're unaffordable for people. And we've seen other data that basic food staple items like potatoes and tomatoes and cabbage have been rising significantly more than the official inflation data shows. And I think what this indicates is that the prices on the streets of Russia are rising significantly more than the official data is showing. And I think Russia is basically masking what's happening within the Russian economy from the official figures. The official figures look quite good. It looks like inflation is moving in the right direction. But I think the failing in terms of the official data is what's going on with interest rates. Because if inflation was genuinely under control, if it was at the levels that the official data is showing, then interest rates should be far lower than 15.5%. Generally speaking, if you've got your economy in equilibrium, then both your interest rate and your inflation should be somewhere near the same level. So if you're thinking of a target rate of 2% inflation, then hopefully you could get your interest rate down to 2% as well, or 2 or 3%. So the fact that Russia has its official inflation data at 6%, but its interest rates are 15.5%, shows that there is a huge gulf between the two. And until those two levels start to come together, I don't think that we're seeing the real data that's actually happening. And I think what we've heard anecdotally in terms of all of these food prices really proves that inflation isn't at 6% in Russia, and it's at far higher level. But Russia doesn't want to acknowledge that because President Putin wants interest rates to be brought down. And you can't really bring interest rates down if inflation is in double digits. If it's at 14%, like the expectations have said, then you would expect that interest rates would also be at or around that level, and that's where they are. And what this tells us is there are serious problems going on in the Russian economy right now. Russia has been suffering from high levels of inflation since the war in Ukraine started, and that erodes the purchasing power of rubles in people's pockets. That's what we're seeing, and that's what we're hearing in terms of people struggling to be able to buy things like cucumbers. And whilst the Russian ruble isn't used internationally anymore, not many countries are accepting it as a form of payment. The only countries that are basically ones that don't really have any choice. If you've got a trading relationship with Russia and they're demanding that you do that, maybe some countries in Africa, Cuba, those sorts of countries would accept Russian rubles. But the vast majority of countries are not accepting them. So the Russian ruble isn't really operating as a true international currency right now. But for people in Russia, they don't have any choice but to use rubles when they're buying things in the stores. Now, of course, anything that's imported has gone up in price because of the sanctions. It's more difficult to actually complete those imports, to make the payments. And so Russia has a far limited market in terms of where it's buying from. So imports have gone up. But what we're hearing in today's episode is that things like cucumbers, which are homegrown in Russia, have also risen in price dramatically because it's costing a lot more to actually make those items. In the past, Russia may have been able to import cheaper cucumbers from other countries, but because of the limitations of the sanctions, that's not happening. And all of this tells us that the Russian economy is under severe pressure at the moment. I don't think the official data is a true reflection of what's happening on the ground in Russia. And until the war in Ukraine comes to a conclusion, I think the Russian economy is going to continue to struggle, and the people in Russia will continue to struggle to put food on the table. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode. You found it useful, informative, maybe a little bit amusing and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. The subscriptions really help me with the algorithm, so that would be a real favour if you could do that for me. Don't forget I'm currently running my competition whereby you could win my property located close to one of the beaches in the UK or a cash alternative prize. Scan the QR code on the screen now or click the link in the description below. Thank you so much to everyone that's supported me in other ways. If you bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you. Really appreciate that support. It really does help to keep me going. And here's something to put a smile on your face.